Okay, it is noon Mountain Time, so it's time to start. Welcome, everyone. Big thanks to all of you who are attending our very first session of virtual SwimBiz. My name is Shana Ferguson. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at USA Swimming, proud lifelong swimmer, and a proud member of the USA Swimming community. We decided to start this virtual SwimBiz because we wanted to bring a little bit more content to you in your homes. As you can see, we're coming to you from our homes as well. And I hope that you can join us, not just today, but in the remainder of our SwimBiz sessions. I'll speak to that at the end. But right now, I would like to just explain a couple of rules of engagement before we jump into today's session. You are all watching as attendees. There are 3 presenters here, Kelsey, myself, and Daisha, although Daisha's screen says Kelsey too. The rest of you are here as attendees. When it is time for question and answers, you won't be able to speak through your microphones, but you can absolutely send us questions using the chat function. You don't have to wait until the Q&A to send your questions. We'll keep track of them as we go for sure. But that is just to say that we will do a little bit of a presentation up front and then save some time at the end for questions. This seminar will not go past 60 minutes, so we'll keep it nice and succinct since we know that everybody's time is extraordinarily valuable. So with that said, I would like to introduce our other 2 panelists today who are our friends from DeVry University. DeVry is a proud partner of the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee and has so generously offered us this course free of charge. So thank you all very much to help us all through this crazy time of change for sure. Kelsey is here. Kelsey's wearing the blue shirt, sitting with the black chair. And then Daisha has the light green walls behind and is waving to you, even though her screen says Kelsey. So without further ado, I'm going to turn over to our teacher for today, Daisha Hankle.
Thank you so much. And, welcome everyone. My name is Daisha Hankle. So I've been with the DeVry University for about 8 years now. I've actually been primarily working from home for about the last 10 years. And I'm very excited to be connecting with you all today. I think, honestly, anytime I can connect with folks who are working with athletes, myself being a former athlete, played sports my entire life, played Division I basketball in college, and then also coached at the D1 level for a couple of years. It's been just, again, a pleasure connecting with folks who are in any way connected with, especially helping our youth. I think that's just part of what drives so many of us. Now, with our session today, what we want to do is maybe spend the next 40 plus minutes or so just kind of covering some information, just things that we want to connect to just at large, the changes that you've been experiencing. And then what we'll do is we are going to spend that remaining period of time just allowing you to ask questions. We want to do our best, myself and then obviously Shana being here as well, to just help you fill in some gaps. This is unprecedented times that we're experiencing, and anything that we can do to support you all, especially being the kickoff for your May webinar series. Again, we are honored to be here, and I actually took a look at the roster. A lot of really great information that's coming up. So hopefully we'll be able to plug on how you can leverage some of those opportunities throughout as well. Now, here's where we like to begin this particular session off. Let's start with the discussion. It's actually a saying from Heraclitus, and you've heard it before, that the only thing that's constant is change. The only thing that's constant is change. And I love this because, well, right now, it's probably more relevant than perhaps it ever has been. We are in the midst of unprecedented change that has shifted the way that we work and navigate in the world personally and professionally. And what I recognize is that for so many of you as members of this organization it's had a tremendous impact on your routines. An impact on just how you do business, how you connect to your families and athletes. And so that being the case, we're going to navigate through some information. And I wanted to start off by first recognizing this. We all, in the midst of change, have a responsibility, especially when you talk about our topic of change leadership. We can all be catalysts for change. Even if you at the moment are feeling just a little overwhelmed by what you've been asked to do, the monumental shift in how you do business at the moment. It doesn't matter if you are a coach, an athlete, an owner. At this point, what we recognize is it's not title, it's how you react. Your actions, your attitude, your behavior around change can really shape how you come out on the other side of this thing. And that's because it's about your actions, about your behaviors. What we're going to talk about in our session today is this. Well, first, what is change? We'll talk a little bit about, and I think Shana, you'll actually jump in and we'll share a little bit about from the larger U.S. Swim organization, just some of the change that they're continuing to make in order to help so many of you. We're going to talk about how you navigate through the various phases of change. And we'll actually do this by sharing some specific tips as we move forward so that perhaps you can better equip yourself as you are working right now to build that important momentum so that when we come back on the other side of this thing, as you start to adjust and adapt to your new normal, that you're ready and that you have, and I think, again, as in sports, you recognize the part of the practice and the training so that when it comes time to perform, it's the same process. It's how are you providing yourself with the tools so that when we get to reopen, you're ready. You're ready for that. Now, we'll talk just very briefly at the end just about how here at DeVry University, we are here now. We will continue to be here to support you or support folks within your team in their growth and development. But we'll get to that. But I wanted to open up the, and I think, Kelsey, if you could pop this question here into the chat area, I would love to get some of you to jump in and share with us this. I want to know, how do you feel about change? I want to know how you're doing. Can you share with us, what are some of those examples that you're currently experiencing? Are you feeling like you're prepared for what's to come? Are you preparing for that next portion, that new normal? And again, Shana, I'm going to ask you, because I know I jumped in a little late. Are folks able to share with all attendees?
Yep. All you need to do in the chat
Wonderful.
box is change the, in the drop-down menu on 2, just change to all panelists and attendees. If you're okay with everybody seeing your response, if you just wanted to come to us as panelists, you can select all panelists.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So when we talk about change, you have these two types, right? We have organizational transitions, which are the kind that come from the outside. When we recognize the reasons why perhaps your facilities and your teams are just not able to meet at the moment, but that has a tremendous impact, right, on the teams themselves, your athletes and your coaches. So you start to recognize that where you have to find a way to reside is somewhere right in the middle, where you're at some point trying to manage these two forces that just don't seem to be cooperating quite as much with folks. Thank you. I see we had one comment. It says change is healthy and good. It's more the uncertainty. You know what? It's so interesting, but because what comes in play is that change, yes, healthy and good. The uncertainty is also a part of it. In this case, the ambiguity that comes along with it. So I love that you gave this distinction, because in both cases, it's uncertainty is related to change, but you're like, yeah, I'd rather have change that happens as opposed to the uncertainty. And again, we can understand that. I also see new methods of communication. Certainly, that can be a challenge as you're looking at, well, what is the best mode of communication, whether it's to coaches or to athletes and families? How are you still making sure that you can provide to the community that you are within? What are some of the great things that you're doing to stay connected? Shana, did you want to jump in on this too? Because I know that you had a point that you were wanting to make about the specific types of changes that you're experiencing, just again, as an organization. I see, Jenny, you mentioned biggest change, learning ways to coach online versus in person. Go ahead, Shana. I just, again, saw that good one from Jenny.
Yeah, an interesting thing about this, coaching online has some intricacies for these coaches, unlike any you might experience with other organizations. We are predominantly a youth serving organization. There are some safe sport implications to coaching online and making sure that we are following the best practices for safe sports. So these coaches, not only are they not able to be with these kids that they love so much at practice, in the pool, doing exactly what these coaches are so good at doing, now we're asking them, and they're asking themselves, quite frankly, to be really good at coaching virtually. And that's just not a tool that any of us grew up learning, right? There was no way that any of us ever guessed that we'd have to teach stroke technique or mental preparedness or endurance online. That's just not anything that we were accustomed to. And so not only here at USA Swimming, but also every single one of these coaches at every single club is dealing with how best to connect with their athletes. I know that some of these coaches are doing it so brilliantly with keeping practice times standard, having Zoom calls during regularly scheduled practice time so that they can connect with the athletes. We know that there's been great success in that, but that's not always easy for everyone, particularly for a coach who doesn't necessarily want to coach via Zoom, right? I mean, it's tricky and it's scary and it's weird. But I just do know that this community of coaches has done an exceptional job of flexing to this new norm.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that because part of what you're really discussing already, and I think a couple of you mentioned this already into the chat, was the challenge. So we had one person who said the challenge may be how you're communicating, how you were able to coach. I mean, that fundamentally, I mean, if you think about it, you probably learned to coach very differently. Who's been trained at this point? I mean, at this point, we may be at, Shana, would you say at the moment we're preparing the next wave of coaches for the next generation? Here's what we have to talk about now. How do we coach, as you say, on the dry side angle? I don't know if you guys can see that one publicly, but I love that because you're saying that some coaches are having a hard time to working from that angle. But maybe that for many of you as key leaders, that might be a natural part of the next phase of preparing that next wave of coaches. Let's see, we had one more that came in. Also, the technology challenges, 50 plus swim, all the new platforms, finding the balance. Go ahead.
We're asking coaches who have been coaching for 30, 40 years in a very traditional way to, on a dime, flip to coaching virtually, right? And that's a lot to ask. And we don't necessarily do it gracefully, and we don't necessarily have it all figured out. But I would assume, and again, I'm a novice here. I'm not the subject matter expert on change management, but I would imagine that any way of connecting is of benefit to these athletes who just want to see their coaches' faces on Zoom or see their teammates on Zoom because they haven't been able to see them. So
engagement. And right now, what we're finding is engagement in any way. It can be so helpful. The technology challenges, whether it's because of you being a novice, maybe it's just trying to figure out, well, what is the right platform or technology medium for us to communicate with our athletes and through the coaches, and it may differ, and it's okay to stumble right now because the effort is what has to be there, right? I know so many of you probably coach up your athletes in the same way. Like, I need you to try. I need you to just get out there. And because what you're asking them to do is to build a muscle, right? To build a muscle that maybe they've never worked out before. And that's essentially the way that we're asking you, right, to adapt to some of this technology in order to stay connected and able to engage, doing all we can to stay relevant and enjoyable. No pool to go to. Absolutely. When your comfort zone, I mean, I can imagine that even for other sports, not being able to get on the field or the court, in the gym, just to, lift. I mean, those little pieces, that's the norm of the routine. I love to hear that many of you are keeping the similar schedules because routine, as I know that for many of you recognize, that's huge for so many athletes. So whether it's I might not be able to get in the pool at this time, but knowing that the people that were there, my coach who was going to be there, we can still have those conversations. We can still make the connection, which also for so many of us is a part of why you do sports. It's to be connected and not just for showcasing your talents. A lot of it is about staying as feeling a part of a team, somewhere that you belong. And so I wanted to shift over to this because many of you were talking about the challenges, whether it's the communication mode, the unfamiliarity of this new way of operating. And this is a great visual representation of really what you were looking for out of a change. Now, typically we have change initiatives. So if you make a change to, a standard operating procedure, or you're saying, hey, we're going to shift our hours or our work environment, how we teach or coach our coaches, those points, you may call that a change initiative. It's planned. You have a blueprint for how you're going to start and then how you're going to get to point B. And so that's where you follow this green line, because this is showing us this is the desired pace of accepting changes. And you can see that we have current state, which for many of us at the moment was probably like when they told you that you were no longer able to have your business open for folks to be in the pool. That was a month, maybe more time in the past. This second dot is where we return to equilibrium. And what's interesting about that is a lot of this depends on you. If we follow the red line, this is showing us where we find folks get stuck in the red zone. It's where the frustration around the challenges that you've mentioned begin to compound. It's where the emotions stay negative because you're not able to make the adjustment or to shift to recognizing that, yeah, there's still opportunity even in the midst of this struggle or the challenge that we're currently facing. Because again, you have to also recognize that this is a period of time. The true takeaway is when you can take deliberate actions, when you can be strategic, not perfect. So for those that you were saying, I'm trying, I'm figuring out how do I keep the schedule and routine to stay connected. How are you utilizing technology as opposed to deciding, well, you know what, it's just not going to work, so I'm not going to try. That's going to make the difference around the type of momentum you're building now, so that when we do reopen, so that when you do get to have folks come back into the pool, into your facilities, back onto your teams in a face-to-face environment, that you're doing that in a way where you've created the momentum to more quickly return back to the equilibrium that was in place. It may look a little bit different initially, but man, it's going to feel good. And as quickly as we can, that's where you start to see this. How quickly you can return back to equilibrium allows you to show how quickly you now can begin to get back to the ROI, which is the return on investment. What is on the other side of this thing, how you can return back to a new normal. Now, I love that because in order to get there, you have to start with this. How do people generally experience change? It's about simply recognition. You have to recognize, one, everyone's going to react differently. Even in our session today, we know that I love, again, the comment where you were like, change is actually good. I can deal with change. It's the uncertainty part that I don't appreciate. Well, that uncertainty, that ambiguity, it causes undue consequences in an already uncertain environment. And so you have to know that it's going to take time to adjust, but over time, even moving into your new normal, when we're past this and we start to reopen, there is going to be a new normal. I wonder how many of you have started to think about how you will continue to utilize some of these technologies that you're having to adjust to right now. How are you going to stay connected? Oops, my apologies. There we go. How are you going to stay connected? There was a comment where you were saying that you're trying to find a balance with what the swimmers need, with what they and their families are currently coping with. I mean, when you look at your role, even in their own day-to-day adjustments, you still play a major part. And change requires different energies for so many of us. This is a key takeaway when you talk about how you communicate around change, especially with the families, the athletes that you're supporting. It's about helping them to understand any new transitions or changes that you're making, whether it's to a schedule, to a technology, to how you're even looking at your typical communication modes. Make sure that you help them to recognize, understand why, and then support them through the process. Be vulnerable yourself and say, look, this is new for us as well. As Shana mentioned, I didn't grow up learning how to teach swim technique online, but I'm sure that many of you are figuring it out. And that can mean so much, especially to a family that have been completely disrupted, to one of your athletes, a young athlete who misses the interaction with you and your friend and their friends. So I think about the importance of how you communicate and why that's so important in the midst of this thing. One more point I want to make, and then we're going to transition into some specific strategies when you look at how you approach change through the various phases. And it's the difference between change and transition. So the change, this is what comes from the outside. So the situation that we're currently in, we've been asked to shelter in place. We've been asked to stay home. You've been asked to find ways to connect. I think one of the points you said on the dry side, and you're like, well, I'm more comfortable on the other side of this. But again, the change comes from outside. This is why we're in current state. Now the transition, and for many of you, this is the internal piece, especially for, again, your young athletes who may be missing that time, that part of the routine, just the drive in, the type of interactions that you get to have with one another, and the culture that you're cultivating within your school. It changes the norms of behavior and culture. I want you to think about how, when you do reopen, will you be able to communicate the process of reopening to your families? How do you prepare for how you're now going to operate when you have multiple folks coming into your facility? What is the plan? You want to ensure that you take into account preparing them to then help everyone more effectively transition. That is essentially your reaction, or the individual, the athlete's reaction to coming back in and sharing that, yes, this may look like the same facility and pool that you left, but how we have to operate around this is going to be a little different. Getting those plans in order is a part of shifting the momentum, how you prepare. So I wanted to make sure that that was a part of this. As you'll see that as we move forward, much of what we're going to cover comes from William Bridges, who is just a well-known author of change theory, and again, adapted from his process of managing transition. So let's talk through these various phases of change, because as we talk in more detail, you recognize that we have these three distinct phases when it comes to change. We have the ending, we have the transition, and then we have the new beginning. Now, I look at, for some of us, the ending happened, again, a few weeks ago, maybe a month or so ago. This is where we had to make a shift, and much of that uncertainty that you were mentioning really started to come into play. And it pushed us to a point where, well, at the moment, we're not able to have folks come in. So when you talk about productivity and performance, looks a little bit different than how we used to measure that before. Now, in the transition, it's interesting because we're moving from this place of skepticism, which will lead us into still a more negative space, to exploration. Now, it's not to say that in the midst of this important leap that lots of things are going to change. We may see incremental change. You may have to, again, provide some SOP of how you keep people safe, and with youth and and family members. How are you going to regulate your environment so that it still abides by new operating procedures in the midst of this? But when you can recognize the opportunity, well, how do I balance using some of these new technologies for some of our swimmers before they come back in? How can you use the communication mode that you're saying, I'm a little clunky with it, but if you can strategize around the communication piece, it allows you to see opportunity in the midst of this, so that when the time comes for you to reopen, and I call that the new beginnings, that's how you are building into that new normal. It's going to be a new normal. It's not going to look like it did before, but how do you prepare yourself to get there? Kelsey, I don't know if you have a question on this one, but I would love to have some of you jump in the chat and share with me this. When you think about your own process around change, which of these phases do you find to be the most challenging for you, just in general? Would you say that, I'm still a little bit stuck in the ending phase, the fact that I'm not in my routine? What's the shift that I'm in the midst of now? Is it the transition? Do you think that you may have the most challenging time moving from the skepticism that, well, what is this going to look like on the other end? Is it difficult for you to see the positives on the other end? So again, I think that's actually our next question. So I'll get to, if you want to start answering Kelsey's question, that's perfect. Because when we talk about the ending phase, you can recognize this. Oh, thank you for joining us. The transition, infinite infinite options and choosing what works best. And you know what, um, Rob here, I was gonna say even internally in our organization, we're finding that we just are asking folks to just try. Sometimes you may find that making those small decisions, you're like, well, how do I know what's going to work best? Some of it is you may have to experiment a little bit along the way. I'll use a quick example. Shayna, if you don't mind, we were talking about preparing for some of these sessions, and then it was determined that using a different type of Zoom platform was better than using the Zoom meetings platform, just for this type of engagement. And I mean, just it seems like a small decision, but it can mean so much when you start to realize, yes, there's lots of options, but we got to make sure that we're exploring and also giving it a try. I
Daisha,
appreciate, yeah, go ahead.
there's something key to Rob's comment here.
Mhm.
Rob says transition is the toughest because there are just so many options. And
Yeah.
I think particularly in this crisis that we're all in right now, this is nothing like anything we've ever seen before, right? So the options are infinite, to Rob's point, and because we've never done this before, we don't know where to start and where to stop and where to. So you said something a little bit earlier that I wanted to repeat because I thought it was perfect. You said, well, you said just try, but you also said we don't need to be perfect. And I think that particularly in the world of competitive swim, probably all competitive sports, but I'm partial to swimming, certainly. Um, getting nailing that point home is a tough one for this group of athletes and coaches and parents. That we just don't have to be perfect right now. We just have to keep moving, and we just have to keep figuring out what those options are to get us through this transition phase. And again, to reiterate, we don't have to be perfect in doing it. We just have to do, right?
Yeah, then that's the momentum piece, right, that we were talking about. How do you pick up momentum? It's not getting stuck. And actually, I love this. We had a question that came in here from Kathleen, if you don't mind us taking a moment to look at, because you were saying that you feel like we just went right to the transition stage. Okay, we can't get in, so now we're going to Zoom and meet as a team and online training. And so you're like, well, did we do this thing backwards? And I would say probably not. I do think that your point about highly accelerated, you probably didn't have a chance to what I would call process the ending, which was in the wake of the pool closures. You probably just didn't have a time to process that. And so I love your question because actually that's a part of where the processing has to begin. You need to recognize that how we are adapting to this. And if I get there we go. Here's where it starts, Kathleen. Recognition that if you're saying that I'm starting to, I would say, feel the ending before, well, after feeling like I just went past the ending. Well, recognize what are the negative reactions that you may be finding. When I talk about circling back, and that's the question that Kelsey popped in, it starts with this. Processing this comes back to what are the attachments that we make that are hard to let go of? Because when I see that you said, hey, the pool's closed, and then we just went right to, how we're connecting and Zooming and online training, which actually for some was the right pace. But for others, where you're saying, I feel like we just needed to process this. It's about the relationships. It's about the team. That's what we talked about, how you are trying to engage, and stay connected to your athletes, to the families at the moment. I know, Shayna, if you want to jump in on this one, because we talked a lot about the schedule, the routines that so many folks have. And I wanted you to speak to that because, again, you certainly just understanding this group, talk about how that could make a Kathleen say, listen, we went right to Zooming, but I'm feeling a loss. And
Yeah,
could that be
I'll tell
connected
you.
to the schedule?
Yeah, particularly heading in. First of all, the end of end of the winter spring season was just completely demolished, and so all these athletes who were training for the culmination of a really great championship series had that taken away from them. I mean, high school athletes, think about those high school seniors, collegiate athletes who lost a whole spring. It just, or a whole winter, the end of their winter. It just was ugly and awful. And to your point, Daisha, maybe we didn't mourn that enough. Maybe the attachment of our teammates and our coaches and our chow hall partners, lunch table partners, and all of those attachments, we didn't get a chance to mourn them because we had to quickly pack up and head home, and we had to quickly close the and sanitize everything. And so I think that that's a pretty astute point. Now here we are heading into the summer, which is another lovely but very different season of our sport. This is oftentimes a season where some kids get involved who aren't generally involved in year-round swimming. So we've got a whole segment of our membership population who won't be engaged in this sport over the summer. And I feel emotional talking about it because it is such a lovely time to be a swimmer and to be a swim parent and to be a swim coach when you get outside and have some meets outside. And there's a social aspect to it that we are mourning, or perhaps to your point, haven't given ourselves a chance to mourn because
Sure.
we're so busy trying to figure out how to save the organization, save the team, save the LSC, that we haven't necessarily really thought about how our schedules and the routine of being on the pool deck 5, 6, 7 days a week was taken away from us. And so I don't know, this is a heavy question. I don't know if you have any coping mechanisms for that or techniques or tools
Yeah.
that folks can use there.
Yeah.
But
Well, we're going to go
real
ahead.
fun.
Yeah, well, actually, this is a part of it. It's a bit of a process, and that's why I started with, we talk through the phases of change, because what you have to recognize, one, are the reactions that you have within each phase. So again, to Kathleen's point, you may be doing this a little bit out of order, right, in terms of the processing, and that's okay. But it starts with the recognition of the strong feelings that you may have felt around having, kind of like Shayna said, it being that safe space, that comfort zone, that you're like, I am used to being outside, connecting with these athletes and these families, with the sunshine, and then certainly with your ultimate place of comfort, which is your competition space, which is inside the pool and on the pool decks, which again is fantastic. But when you find that there's strong feelings of loss, you have to identify them, whether it's in yourself, especially if it's for your athletes, your additional coaches that you're working with, so that you can move on to focus on the future. But how we do this is some of the the strategies that you are already doing, which is, how are you connecting? And you're staying connected. Now, yes, these folks, they have on khakis and white shirts, and perhaps you guys wearing ball caps and and your flops, which is totally fine as well. But the point being, being proactive about how you're communicating with those that are your swim families, with your athletes, with your coaches, needs to become scheduled, routine. It looks like, again, you're Zooming, you're having these meetings that are coming up, but also connect informally. We were just on a call. I was on a call right before this talking to a group of leaders in another organization, and they just said, some of it is just having an unscheduled check-in. Shoot them a text. Say, listen, how are you doing today? And just check in, because that connection, allowing some people to stay connected to you, can be so important in terms of how they're processing and ultimately how they're going to come out of this as well. The next is the open and transparent communication. And I know that for many of you, being able to be a part of this membership and this organization with USA Swimming and SwimBiz is so important to you, because it gives you more connectivity, and not just, I would say, the challenges of feeling isolated. I know, Christine, I see your comment. I'm going to get to that, because I do think that that's an important one I want to address. In case you guys can't see it, the question or the comment was, not everyone may be in the same phase of change. And you're absolutely right. For some, again, you just may be a person who says, okay, I got to adapt to this change a little bit easier. And maybe for others, you recognize that, well, I didn't have quite as much disruption as some others, because of other pieces that are impacting right in my own house, or me personally. How do you overcome the challenges of working with or including others that are still in, you say, the resistance? I want to call it hesitance mode. And the reason I would call it hesitancy is because you really have to give folks a period of adjustment and use empathy, that how they react to change may be very different from the way that you're reacting to this particular change. And a lot of this comes down to how you listen, especially if you're in a position to help this individual. And I'll just share that, if you, again, either as a leader or a coach for them, listen to their concerns. You may not have the answers, especially right now, because most of us don't have the answers. We are in a pure reaction mode. But what you can do is listen, empathize, affirm that they're heard, I understand this is a challenge for you. Share it. These are some of the challenges that I personally have experienced as a result of this change as well. Yeah, a little bit different from yours, but let me tell you how I'm navigating through this. Who did you reach out to? Who did you reach out to? Who are you reaching out to? Who's helping you? Again, I love the kind of roster of webinars that you guys have coming up this month. Is there a resource that you can point them toward? So I would just say this, Christine, to your question, two things. One, you want to start with giving people that period of adjustment. The next is I'm going to share some strategies when we talk about how you navigate through the transition phase. And I'll get to that in just like 2 slides, so bear with me. If you are able to, Kathleen, navigate back to the ending and think about how you can communicate with your team, with others that can help you to process how you're feeling, how you can support your athletes and families through this. It gets us to the transition where perhaps the strong feelings of loss aren't hitting you quite as hard. But now we have to start another part of the process, which is how do we move through the transition as quickly and effectively as possible, especially when there's uncertainty and ambiguity on the other side of it. First, you recognize when there's reactions such as this, right? Someone talked about resistance, whether it's covert, like someone who's just pouting, or someone who is just saying, look, I'm not on board with this. I don't like the way that this is going, or how they decide they no longer want to be involved. And that can be difficult. So again, Christine, I'm looking at your comment, but you will know if you're connecting with folks, someone who just isn't quite themselves. Maybe they're struggling with the technology. I know a few folks mentioned that, but if that's the case, are there things that we can do, best practices that we share? How do we continue to support and to help? And I know, again, Shayna's team is doing a great job to bring you some resources.
Daisha, I'm going to interrupt you there because there was a question asked in the chat.
Oh, sure. I missed that.
Perfectly with what you just said. Well, you wouldn't have noticed that it worked in perfectly with what you just said. One of our attendees said, the novelty of the transition, the novelty of using Zoom sessions and dry land training and this virtual end of the season picnic is wearing off. People are growing tired of it and attendance is dropping. So this might be a question, quite frankly, to everybody, because Daisha isn't going to have the hands-on swim coach experience, but how are people reinventing themselves and their teams and their instruction during this transition? So if you have any comments on that, by all means, please put them in the chat. But I thought that that was a really interesting point, right? That we have accepted that there's change. We have moved into transition. We are accepting this. We are taking action. But now everybody's like, well, great. Well, I'm tired of Zoom. I'm tired of looking at you on this TV screen. I'm tired of it, right? So if anybody out there has any suggestions for how to manage through the limitations that we are all facing because we have to do everything virtually, then by all means, drop them in the chat box. Yeah, good one. And we can pause on that for a moment, Shayna. So again, the question is, and as one of your members was asking and Shayna was bringing up, the question is, how in the midst of this, can you reinvent yourself? How are you reinventing yourself in the midst of this transition? When you may find that some of the current connection ways that the ways you're connecting aren't resonating with quite the impact as before. We're also finding that people are saying through this phase, from the end phase through to transition, that coaches and leaders are feeling reinvented, and maybe not always in a good way, right? I knew that I was supposed to be on the pool deck at 5:30 in the morning every day. Now I don't have that, and I don't know what I'm supposed to be. Again, these are loaded questions, Daisha. We don't expect you to be the expert, but I think some tools for how to navigate the reinvention of who we are and the repositioning of what our roles and responsibilities are in this community is scary. Yeah. Well, I feel like you've already touched on a couple of two different areas that we were going to go. So we can kind of wrap this up. And as Shayna mentioned, I'm not going to have all the answers for you, but I'm hoping that we can point you toward some areas that will help you. And Kelsey, if you could go ahead and pop in a link to, we have a DeVry blog on embracing uncertainty, because a lot of what you're asking is not unreasonable. These are the same types of questions that, I mean,
we were addressing in a session earlier today with the manufacturing organization. So it's, these changes are fundamentally shifting how people are asked to do their work, how they complete work, what are the measures, and in your case, how you serve your communities. You have to think about some of these areas around control, understanding, how you offer support or gain support. And I love this question about who am I now? I'm not gonna be able to answer that question for you. What I can tell you is that, and I'll tell you guys this. I was actually having a conversation with the mentor of mine. She also was a basketball coach, played and coached at the professional level. And you know what she told me? She said that athletes perhaps may be some of the most equipped to deal with the current situation. I know that, again, it's difficult. So I hear you when you're saying, like, I'm not sure who I am about to this end. But the point is that the same type of mental toughness that you are communicating and teaching to your athletes, well, you can't communicate and teach that if you don't have that internally inside of you already. So I share that because I want you to know that there's a part of resolve, about perseverance, that comes along with what you already have as a part of your toolbox. And so when you start looking at how you attack something such as a new technology, you don't give up. So hard, you say, you can't control. How do you control? You can control your new schedule. How do you take your old routine, which may have been leaving home, driving in, and say, listen, I need to make an adjustment and I need to adapt. But don't look at it as I'm losing who I am. Look at it as I have to make this shift. And for many of you, know that it's for a period of time. Now, what that adjustment is going to look like in the new norm, yes, that may be different, and that's okay. But what I do know is that you can find this internally to do what it is that you're asking your athletes to do. I love this point about focusing on the connection aspect of them instead of just the swim and coaching. Okay, I like this. I'll finish reading this one. It says, not everything has to be swim related. You've also found that by giving the families or kids a break every once in a while, one normal session off seems to work. Seems that brings them back to the Zoom sessions, and they're being excited. Well, I appreciate that. So again, thank you for sharing that. Because again, we were looking for some folks to also kind of jump in on what are some things that you're doing to stay fresh. Shayna, can you get into this point? I was mentioning this, that we were going to talk about how this quote from Henry Adams, that chaos often breeds life when order breeds habit. Shayna started off the session today talking about how proud she was of how many of you are making the shift in the midst of this. You're making the change. I do think that that's a big point of this, is you have to try. And you don't have to be perfect, but that connection, you're connecting. If you look at it as, how do I not just stay engaged, but how do I stay connected? That's another component to making this all work. One thing is that we're trying to do is a talent show. So let me just share this one, because it was a strategy here. Talent show, the fish has talent, or we're planning to run a live event allowing swimmers to share with their teammates talents that they have away from the pool. It might help to bring attention. You have hit on number one bullet point here, which is, how do I stay connected? And through innovation. You probably would have never run a talent show such as this, right? Shayna, go ahead, because I love where we're going with this. You're starting to think about this a little bit differently. Yeah, no problem. I'll post that.
Yeah, I think you said it all. So I know you're going to turn it over to me on the innovation part, but
Yeah.
This is so nice for me to be able to read these comments too. Now, just to alert you, if you do indeed want everybody to see your comments, you've got to select to all attendees. Right now, we're seeing it as panelists, and happy to kind of relay that to everyone. But if you want everybody to see them, please select all attendees. Because quite frankly, we don't have the answers here either, and we're all getting tired of Zoom too. So I like the idea of giving everybody a break. If you need a break, we talk about it at the office. Like, why do I feel like I need a vacation day now more than I ever did? Well, because this is a different type of engagement. And so these kids may have been really excited about the idea of virtual touch bases in the beginning of this crisis. And now it's just become part of the routine that reminds them that they're not in the pool. So we have to get a little bit more innovative about the way that we connect. And so, getting these suggestions in the comment box are nice. The idea of giving a little bit of a break, or having them showcase something that 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 is a talent that is not swimming, or maybe inviting a special guest. I know we've had some national teamers visiting teams virtually, and that's
Love
been,
that. It's a good idea.
and the athletes, quite frankly, are excited to do it. They're feeling the same amount of stir craziness. So that is absolutely a tool we want to continue, and I offer that up to you here. So if you do want athletes to quote unquote visit your clubs, we can absolutely do that too.
Nice. Yeah. Thank you, Stacy. You said we have asked swimmers to issue a dryland challenge. Our coaches videotape them accepting the challenge, share on Instagram, and the families to enjoy. Excellent. Yeah, another good one. And I'll just say, just in general, something else that we use internally is it's just to have a theme, a theme for the day, and maybe the theme is more so related to what's the activity that you and your family are doing? Can you? And especially if you have young swimmers, ask them to come to the next one with almost like a show and tell. Show us your favorite crazy socks. What is your favorite, local sports team? Give them something that may be personal to them, that allows you to build a connection, a bond of connection that may not be, like you said, quite as related to being in the pool and technique necessarily, but just building the what they're sharing with you. Because again, as you learn more and more about each other, that's a part of the team culture and camaraderie as well. So I think that could be at least something fun to inject, especially with some of the young ones. Jenny, you said teaching them. Oh, wow, that's a good one. When did this come? I don't know if you guys saw this. Thank you for sharing. You said they look forward to being chosen, finding the answers, and even having reports prepared. Okay, Jenny, it sounds like you're doing something right if you're telling me that they're coming with reports in the midst of quarantine. That's fantastic. So again, and I appreciate you sharing that with everyone. So hopefully you see that innovation at times comes from necessity. And that's a part of where we are. One thing else I wanted to mention is the time for self-reflection. If you go to the link on the blog that Kelsey mentioned a moment ago, part of it said that you need to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. So for many of you being athletes, maybe you're not in the pool, but talk about very clearly, how are you also staying healthy for yourself, mentally, physically, in order to help you. You said you hope to meet at the beginning of May. Okay, a virtual race. Swimmers ran a 5 or 10K, could ride 10 miles. That's amazing. 100 swimmers participate. So Monica, thank you for sharing. Again, I love these examples of what we have Christina, I know you were trying to communicate with Jenny, but change that out to all participants, because they want to make, or all attendees, so that they can see your responses. You guys are getting some feedback here from some of your peers. I appreciate you guys sharing. Now, there was one comment I want to get back to, because you had mentioned something here about, okay, there was a comment. You were saying, can I pivot quickly enough? New responsibilities that will be needed on top of the continuing responsibilities. So let's actually talk about this, because many of us in the midst of some of these changes recognize that you're being asked to do some things that you're saying, hey, that's not why you hired me. That's not why I do this, but yet these are things that need to get done. And when you get to this point, I look at the fact that right now, I think that most of us, most organizations are in the midst of the transition phase. We're in the upswing, whether you're on the end where we're still finding this dip, which again, probably for most of you feels like, well, yeah, we're somewhere in the midst of this dip and wondering, well, when can we reopen? When can I get back in the pool and start meeting in person with these athletes and holding meets again? Ambiguity, uncertainty is part of the reason why. So you look at this time trajectory that we're experiencing. When you reopen and we start to say, okay, I know that we need to make moves. We're ready to open our doors, kick them open, everyone come in. There still may be challenges that you may experience. And that was the point that I wanted to bring up with your comment was, as a part of the change, you may still be struggling about uncertainty. How long do we now operate in this new normal? What makes sense? Shayna mentioned that you had to shut down, and then maybe you had to do deep cleaning. What does that now look like? As a result of the change, you may now find that you're going to have more responsibilities. You may have a smaller staff. Um, you may have to work at a faster pace because you're thinking, I need to make up for time lost. But that's where taking advantage, I think, right now of your May workshop and webinar offerings becomes a very critical component to helping you get ready for when you reopen. I looked through the topics. Again, I appreciate that you guys shared that with me, because what I believe is that right now, what's in it for you is a growth component to experimenting with your technology tools, looking at, again, some of the innovative examples that some of the other members are doing within their own communities and with their schools. Recognizing how you can continue to leverage technology in a positive way. How do you ensure that you're doing great things in your community and being seen? Again, that's going to be a part of some of your webinar topics. But when you look at some of the keys that I wanted to just talk about, some of the keys once you get into that new beginning stage, a lot of it is about giving yourself permission to emerge. It is so easy to get stuck in a negative space, in the things that it's not going right. You guys talk about perfection, it's not going to be perfect. And even your reopening, it may not be perfect either. But what we do know is that you're going to do it. And you're going to keep working at it until you can get it right. Find the right mix. And we know that for safety being part of the reason why you got to get this thing right. But another reason is the connection and the important role that you play for those families and in your communities. So at that point, make sure that you all stay connected, even as a membership group, so that you can be clear about how are you communicating, what's the right standard operating procedures, what are the right best practices. Consider how this may have impacted some of your families where maybe the current schedule doesn't work for them. So again, how do you take the feedback and then make some other adjustments? I'm saying this because I don't want you to think that you pivoting or the pace at which you're going to be asked to make some new decisions is going to change. You may start to see that accelerates, but don't be intimidated by that. Part of it is how you're communicating, and not then again isolating yourself within your own school or within, again, your facility, but ensuring that you are connecting with others in order to learn about what they're doing. What are they doing right? What are some things that you can bring over into your area and make sure that that's a benefit to your family, to your coaches? Swimmer engagement is super important, but only one aspect. Yeah, keeping the staff together. You said payroll, a big challenge. Certainly, huge business component, 100%. And you know what? A lot of organizations are looking at how can we reopen so that we can start to actually address this in a more clarified and coherent way. I mean, I listened to how you talk about missing some of the swimmers that come in the summertime that are not year round. An important service that many of you offer to your communities. Think about the staff that you have, or those that would have been back on staff because they were, either high school, out of school, or college swimmers that were coming back and being a part of that swim community as well. You may not have all the answers. And I think that it's important that as leaders within your schools or your communities, that it's okay to not have all the answers, but what you need to do is continue to look for ways to engage, stay connected. And at this point, how do you build momentum? How do you build momentum for your reopening so that when the time comes, I would say you're not on the back burner. So when the time comes, you're in a position to ride a wave that's going to help you more quickly get back on your feet and get moving in a positive direction. It's not going to be without its own challenges. And that's why I love your point you were saying about keeping your staff together, because you're going to need help. And in the midst of this climate, it's going to be so important that you stay connected with them as well. connect with them individually, whether it's regular check-ins, if that's possible, unscheduled check-ins, to make sure that you know that they know from the human side that you care. Showing that is going to let them know that when you're asking them to make some tough calls, or you have to make some difficult decisions, that they're going to still be able to look at how they were treated and support you. And if they are still on staff, then make sure that they're passing that grace along to your families and to those athletes as well. I only have about 5 minutes left, and I'm so sorry. Obviously, we were answering questions throughout, but I do want to make sure if you guys have some additional questions that you can drop those here into the chat. We certainly want to make sure that we get to those at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and share one more thing while we are kind of in the midst of this. Shayna, as she mentioned at the beginning, we are proud supporters of the USOPC. The few partnership benefits that I'll quickly mention here are actually twofold, so kind of exciting. For current and past athletes may be eligible for this Team USA scholarship. So again, there are some eligibility restrictions that you'll have to make sure that we can certainly get you details on that. But again, for current and past athletes, they may be able to receive full tuition scholarships. Obviously, our programs are hybrid, so online, which allows you to socially distance at this point. And for all athletes, coaches, staff, know that your family members may also be eligible. That would include immediate family, dependents, and Kelsey, please remind me, I believe siblings would also be included in this. You are able to take a complimentary course. So if you're looking right now at, well, maybe this is a time for you to take a class in project management or in organizational leadership. We certainly have those options, and you can take that at no tuition cost to you. Should you decide to actually continue forward, finish like a degree program, either at undergraduate or graduate level, we do have a special partnership tuition savings. That's a 30% tuition savings. So Kelsey's going to drop some information here into the chat just in case you guys would like more information about that. Please let us know. But at this point, Shayna, did I miss any questions? Because there was a ton that were coming through, and I appreciate you helping me manage that. But yeah, let's certainly get into some questions from the group.
Yeah, particularly for our first time doing this. So thank you.
Oh, wonderful.
Also going to join us at the end of what is currently scheduled for SwimBiz on June 2nd. Although if we get some real momentum with this, we'll continue to add sessions. We just hope to be back in the pool and back in the open
by that point, right?
But Daisha is going to join us with a project management class. So that is going to really, dive deeper.
Yeah. So, and actually, and I was gonna say, Shayna, like the cool thing about it is you guys have some things on like using social media. You have something on like leading with comfort, which again, leadership stuff is gonna be so vital for this group. But I love that we're coming back at the end with project management, because what we're gonna want to do is figure out how do we most effectively put your plans, all the things that you're gonna be growing in and knowledge building over the course of this month. Let's put this into a plan so that we can take action. Right. So again, I want you guys to get fired up about that. But again, we certainly appreciate the opportunity, but I'm really looking forward to figuring out how do we help them leverage what you guys are covering over the course of this month in a positive way.
That's a great segue, Daisha. So today, we're recording this and posting it. Today, right now, is May 5th. On Thursday, May 7th, at the exact same time, so 48 hours from now, we'll be hosting a couple of experts in how to use local media, both earned media and paid media. So as we are trying to get our teams back up and running, as we are recruiting swimmers, as we're trying to get back in the pool, it's going to be critical that we use our local community media to help us do that. So join us on Thursday, May 7th at noon Mountain Time. But again, we will record it and post it as well. So Daisha, Kelsey, thank you so much. Big thanks to all the attendees for joining us for our first session of SwimBiz, and we'll see you back here. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.